redemption. And on your chart there, what I tried to do is summarize 7 basic themes that you see running across the church fathers. Now, these are in the New Testament, and they're foreshadowed in the Old Testament. What the church fathers are doing are starting to use Greek concepts and philosophy to elucidate them and to enunciate them, and to say what is not happening, what is happening in terms of redemption, or soteriology. Soteriology is the study of salvation. In a broad sense, the study of redemption. So I guess the task really for the next 20 minutes here is to try to just flesh out some of these 7 themes and what the church fathers have to say about it, so that we can get a clear understanding of their Christology. The first theme, and I left more room for your first one there, Christ is mediator. I'm going to give you a little more information on that, because it's like the dominant principle. But the church fathers do this in a special way. The first one is what I want to call the incarnation as the metaphysical foundation. The incarnation as the metaphysical foundation. That word metaphysical, I know when we hear that, we think of like a metaphysical bookstore where you can read about crystals and energy and chakras and stuff. But what it means in this sense is nothing to do with that. Metaphysical, in this sense, means ontological or pertaining to being, sort of reality at its deepest level. It's in distinction to purely functional terms or just doing. It's related to being, as opposed to doing or accidental traits of things. It's reality at its deepest level. So the metaphysical foundation for this role of Christ as mediator is going to be the incarnation. What's the incarnation to the church fathers? God, the Word, begins the process of redemption by assuming a human nature. This is the most basic condition for redemption, the assuming of a human nature. For example, Gregory the Great, one of the church fathers, wrote in the 500s, said that God took to himself all that human nature has in order to give them back to us. God takes to himself everything human nature has, not because he needs it, but so that he can give it back. We'll get into more of that in a little bit. The second one is that the incarnation is Christ is mediator because he's the logos or the wisdom of God. We saw the word logos in the writings of John, especially in the Gospel of John. Logos is very hard to define. It's where we get the word logic from. It can mean reason, the logic. It's closely related to wisdom or Sophia. The basic idea here is that the wisdom of God, the Sophia of God, is sort of like the blueprints in the mind of God for everything that he's going to create in the cosmos. Everything that God creates comes from an idea or a blueprint. We do this as human beings. You can't do anything as a human being unless you first think of it. I mean, sneezing doesn't count. That's not really properly human action, like my cat sneezes. But to think of something, to say something, you have to think it and then you say it. And so this is how this notion of the logos or the wisdom of God. It's sort of this infinite wellspring of ideas or blueprints in the mind of God that, in some sense, have always been present in the divine simplicity of God's mind. The fathers Justin Martyr, writing in the 2nd century, and Athenagoras, also before the 4th century, they didn't make a clear distinction between God always thinking the Word, thinking this one perfect Word of himself, that from the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. But they also saw that in creation, which they got a lot from Jewish wisdom literature, that when God creates, His wisdom is the means by which all of creation springs forth. They didn't make a very clear distinction between those two things. They will later on when you get certain misunderstandings of that. But what this doctrine of it's the logos or the wisdom of God which is becoming incarnate in the person of Christ, that allows for their doctrine of what we can call the universal mediation of Christ. That's not a term, but it's a helpful term, the universal mediation. Because the mediation that's claimed by the Church Fathers is universal. They're not saying this is a Jewish guy who has some really interesting things to say. They're saying he's the very wisdom of God incarnate, and that's what allows him to have a mediating capacity. Christ is not a mediator because he's a microcosm just like any other human being. He's not like a go-between. He's not... The Church Fathers didn't see the Christ mediating principle. He's a mediator because he's kind of like the highest thing in creation and the lowest divine thing. But that he is both at the same time. That's what allows him to mediate. So it's different from how I was describing the human being as kind of like this midpoint in creation. It's going to be that mystery right there, the two and the one. Somehow he is one thing, and somehow he is two things, which seems like a violation of the most basic and philosophical principles. But that's what allows him to have a mediating quality. Good. The number two there. How does Christ carry out this mediating role for the Church Fathers? And you'll hear how biblical this is. They're really getting this from St. Paul and his Philippians hymn in Philippians chapter 1 or 2. Christ redeems. He brings about salvation through his personal human history of descent and ascent. The reason I mentioned personal and human is because all this stuff sounds kind of up in the clouds. You know, this person Jesus is the wisdom of God. He's the logos of God. But the way this mediation happens, the way this side of things, so to speak, happens, is through the personal human history of Jesus, through this descent and ascent. I use the expression, if you like blackjack, I call this the double down and the double up. It's the logos, or the wisdom of God, descends once into human nature and then descends a second time into the experience of death and suffering and death. And then ascends to resurrected life, resurrects to that, and then ascends again to God's life. How does that work out? It's going to take some time for the Church Fathers to work that out. But it's really important to understand that movement down, that movement up in the human history of Christ is going to be essential for how his mediation comes about. Here's one of your quotes on the back there. Augustine says this. I hope we're at the top. I hope I didn't get that too messed up there. But only Christ alone descended, and only Christ alone ascended. Not that we should confuse the dignity of the head with that of the members, but that the unity of the body be not separated from the head. This is that movement of divine wisdom and logos coming down in the incarnation, down into human suffering, and then back up in this double movement is not going to be something simply that Christ does for the human person. It's going to be something that he invites the human person to do with him. And that's part of the way that patristic soteriology works.